Imagine you're cruising along on a road trip. You know your final destination, but you haven't mapped out your route. Your plan was just to go with the flow and figure it out along the way. Then you hit a few closed roads, and suddenly you're lost. You're low on fuel, and you have no idea what turn to take next. What do you do next? That fun road trip that you envisioned has taken a very stressful turn. And anxiety just knots in your stomach, and your confidence in winging this road trip is wavering by the mile. Now, imagine that same feeling, but with your exams creeping closer each day. Your bedroom is a disaster zone of highlighted notes, flashcards, empty coffee cups, energy drink cans, and your eyes just burn from staring at the screen for hours, but the textbook pages still look like gibberish. The all-nighters aren't working anymore, and all you can think about is why you couldn't just get organized sooner. So here's the thing. This "I'll be fine, I work well under pressure" attitude, it works until it doesn't. And when exam panic sets in, even your best last-ditch efforts can't save you. And unfortunately, once you get to this point, you're probably just aiming to get through the exam. I want you to really think about what happens when you leave studying to the last minute. Just picture those late nights just desperately flipping through your textbook, chugging coffee, and your eyes burning as the words blur together. So why do so many students still end up in panic mode? Often, it's because we lack a strategic roadmap. We know where we need to end up, which is to ace the exam, but not the steps to chart a course there. And that changes today. And hopefully after this video, you won't ever get to that point again. Because as someone who coaches thousands of students on how to learn, I'm going to help you actually create a detailed study schedule that you'll be able to stick to and that will improve your quality of studying. So let's jump straight in with trying to create your plan. There's 3 steps to consider when planning for your exams. Step 1 is to plan your timetable in reverse. Step 2 is to prioritize foundational knowledge using the Swiss cheese model. And step 3 is to dive into finer details after you've established your foundational knowledge. All right, let's jump into step 1, which is to plan your timetable in reverse. You need to work backwards and plan your revision process by looking at the big picture first. It's like planning a road trip. You know your destination, doing well in the exam, and now we need to map a journey to get there successfully. What topics and subjects will be revised along the way? When will they be tested? What content's going to be tested? Let's jump into Google Calendar to better explain how you should plan your timetable in reverse. Look at it this way. Let's say that we are starting in January. Say it's January 1st today, and you've got a series of exams at the end of February. You've got biology on the 25th of February, physics on the 27th of February, and let's say that you have maths on the 28th of February. And I'm just going to mark the dates of these exams here. And after you've marked these dates, you have to plan a few things in reverse. The first thing I do is, let's say that on the 20th of February, this is the deadline when I want to get all of my preparation for all of my exams done. So this is just going to leave me 5 days until my first exam as a buffer, just in case I need some more time. If we work backwards, just using my instinct, as a rough estimate, I'd want to get all of my note-taking done by the 7th of February. And that's because I'd want a few weeks to attempt practice papers and revise for the exams. And all the learning and note-taking should at least be done 1 to 2 weeks before your actual exam, because this means that you can spend the remaining time just filling in the gaps and getting exam ready. And going further back, here into January, what I want to do is I'd want to get at least half of my notes done by the 15th. And that leaves me around roughly half the time to revise for the exams. So do you actually just stop here? Is all you need to do is just map out these dates? Not necessarily. What you can do here is that you can just go even deeper with this. You can dive into curriculum overview for each of these subjects and check what's tested. And chances are some of these subjects will be tested more in depth than others and will require you more time to revise. You can then split up the time from today until the end of January. You can do this evenly between the 3 subjects based on what's tested or how much needs to be revised. You can then do something like finish the biology note-taking on the 25th of January, and then physics by the 28th of January, and lastly, maths by the 5th of February. This leaves you with some buffer time before the 7th, which is the original cutoff date for your note-taking. And maybe you're not actually used to this concept of having a buffer, but having a buffer is just so important because you will hit roadblocks and detours. These obstacles in your revision process means you need to underschedule your revision plan and give yourself some room for your deadlines. And obstacles also mean that your schedule is bound to change and fluctuate. You need to anticipate delays and be flexible. You should also know that exam prep isn't always a clear and linear process. You're not going to do all your note-taking first and then all your revisions second. Note-taking and revision, they're not actually cleanly separated, and in fact, are pretty intertwined. So how you plan your revision schedule, it will vary, but what I've shown here should serve as a good guideline. Now that you've got a rough timeline of what subjects to study and when you need to study these subjects, the next question you need to ask yourself is, how do I start revising for each subject? So here's step 2. Prioritize foundational knowledge using the Swiss cheese model. Now, don't worry, I'm not going crazy talking about food here, but what I'm talking about is a framework you need to apply to how you approach your revision. So when it comes to revision, the order in which you revise your material is very important. Many students get the order of the revision wrong and end up spending a lot more hours on revision than they actually need to. So if I mention Swiss cheese model, what comes to mind? Well, I hope you and I are thinking of the same thing, and maybe something like this. And how does this apply to studying? Well, the Swiss cheese model helps us understand to have a bulletproof system, it's not about just having one layer of defense without any holes. Rather, it's about having many layers, each layer with tiny holes that come together and form a robust defense wall. Think of it this way. If we look at the first layer of cheese here, there are some holes, not many huge ones, just some small visible holes, and anything that passes through this layer will be blocked by the second, even if it's not blocked by the first. And if we stack more layers, the better this defense system is. And these layers can apply to anything. So in COVID, each layer can represent a different precaution measure. Vaccines, mask wearing, hand sanitization, and social distancing. And each measure in itself wouldn't necessarily be effective in fighting COVID, but added together, a robust defense system is created. You can apply this to studying as well. Each layer represents each round of revision. For each round of revision, you shouldn't try to have a layer of cheese without holes. That's quite impossible. Instead, you want to do many rounds of revisions and slowly plug in the gaps in your knowledge, minimizing the chance of content gaps after each round of revision. How do you do that? By focusing on the foundational content first. But how should you identify what is foundational? Think about the core aspects of the subject that influences and supports the rest of the chapter. In biology, will it be more important to understand the general process of photosynthesis or memorize the specific compounds produced? It will definitely be the general process. But why is that the case? Well, you need to know how photosynthesis works first before you can understand the chemical processes produced. The general process of photosynthesis is the big picture which you cannot do without. And without this big picture, it's like trying to piece a jigsaw puzzle together without knowing what picture you're trying to create. So what about a subject like maths? Are the principles of differentiation foundational, or the application of differentiation? And you probably guessed this correctly, it's the principles. Without the principles of chain rule and differentiation, you will never be able to start applying differentiation in real life use cases. So when you're studying, think about what needs to exist before the rest of the content starts to make sense. And if you study these foundational ideas first, it allows you to form that big picture connection with other bits of information. And once the foundations are connected, other content which comes after becomes more easier and relevant to understand. And you should really click here to watch a detailed video we did on how to actually take notes properly to form these big picture connections quickly, since 99% of students do it wrong. If you're still struggling to identify what is foundational, ask yourself, can you identify the headers in a topic? And normally, the way to know if something is foundational is if there's a lot of content that belongs under a given header. Now that you know how to identify what's foundational knowledge, you should start with the foundational knowledge during your learning and revision phase. Here, I'm just adding notes onto these dates, roughly based on how long I think I need to spend learning and revising the foundational content. Feel free to adjust for yourself, as always. So there's also one sneaky benefit of prioritizing foundational knowledge first that I want you to know. Studying the large chunks first gives you a higher chance of succeeding in the exam. If you can't cover the smaller topics in depth, you still have a chance to deduce the answers correctly, based on your general big picture understanding. For example, even if you didn't study in detail the specific real-life applications of differentiation, you would still be able to answer such questions if you understood the differentiation principles. So you want to make sure that the first revision and note-taking blocks in your calendar, you're going to focus on the foundational ideas first. And once step 2 gives you a rock-solid foundation, you can now start on step 3, diving into the finer details. After you revise the foundations, which are the first few layers in the Swiss cheese model, this is when you should start filling in the finer gaps in your knowledge. Once the foundation is laid, the other finer details can be better embedded within a general framework in your mind, which makes the finer details easier to learn and remember. So when do you start diving into the details? Figuring out when you're done with the foundational knowledge is not an exact science. You need to rely on some personal judgment here. One trick you can use is to flip through a practice paper or two and see if you can generally comprehend around 70% of the questions. It's fine if the more difficult questions make you scratch your head, but flipping through the practice papers should give you a good gauge to know if your foundations are set. Once you're confident that your foundations are set, then you can start devoting some time memorizing small details and facts. For example, the dates of less important historical events, or the atomic structure of a chemical element, or even trying to tackle curveball questions that are less likely to appear on a test. This is also the time where you can start attempting practice papers to identify these curveball questions, which reveal your true gaps in your understanding. And by the way, feel free to check out this video on how to reduce your reliance on practice papers during revision and crank up your revision efficiency. Hopefully it's slowly starting to make sense as to how you'd want to plan the foundational ideas first before covering the smaller details. The issue with most students is that they try too hard to memorize everything from the get-go, even the finer details, which should only be studied almost at the end, after covering the foundations. Only after covering the foundations will you be ready to start learning a lot more details and get exam ready. Now that you have an understanding of what you need to revise and the order in which you need to revise it, the next video will cover how you can practically do this and perform in your exams. So to round up everything that we went over in this video, step 1, map your route in reverse. Think of your exam like planning a road trip. You know your final destination is exam day, but first you need to chart a journey to get there. So start with your test dates and work backwards, setting milestones for finishing the initial content review, revising foundations, then filling gaps. This reverse planning creates an overview of the full timeline. Step 2, lay the foundational knowledge first when revising. Identify the core causal concepts that build the rest of the content. For example, in biology, understand photosynthesis before memorizing the specific compounds. In maths, know the differentiation principles before the application questions. Revising these foundations first allows better retentions of the detail later. And finally, step 3, fill in the finer details. In the last 1 to 2 weeks before your exam, devote time to memorizing small facts, attempting practice questions, and addressing any final gaps in your understanding. This solidifies your knowledge and gets you truly exam ready. Hopefully this strategic approach will help you remove that last-minute cramming and set you up for success. So tell me, how are you going to apply these tactics to your own exam prep? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more. See you next time.